When we started looking into dementia and Alzheimer's, I didn't expect to be coming here.
There's the Grand Tetons. You're looking at the Grand Teton National Park.
Nestled in these majestic Wyoming mountains is Dr. Paul Cox and his small nonprofit called Brain Chemistry Labs.
We're a little bit off the mainstream here.
I first sat down with Paul and talked about his unorthodox approach 5 years ago in 2019.
I want my scientists to have ideas that they can pursue that are different than the current ideas. It looks almost like they're invading the amygdala. Basically what we're arguing is amyloid is not the cause of Alzheimer's, it's a symptom. So is tau. These are the symptoms. This is like trying to look at what caused a train wreck by investigating the wreckage. We'd rather go way up the tracks and look at the switches, and that's what we're doing genetically in our studies, is try to find out what are the very basic roots of protein misfolding, and if so, is there a way to stop that?
It's an audacious theory that has been years in the making, coming not from a medical doctor, but from an ethnobotanist.
Ethnobotanist. What exactly is that?
I'm trained to spend my time with indigenous people and see how they use plants for medicine. And if we start looking at the pattern of illness and wellness among indigenous peoples as a way of discovering clues to major illnesses, this can sometimes pay off.
His novel theory on Alzheimer's disease has its roots on the tiny island of Guam in the Pacific. It started with a mystery surrounding a bizarre mix of ALS and Alzheimer's symptoms.
In Guam. What did you see there?
At its peak, a quarter of the people in these villages were dying of this disease. Every single family I visited with had some family member that died from the disease.
In Guam, the Chamorro villagers were seeing grave neurodegenerative symptoms at 50 to 100 times greater than anywhere else in the world. Dr. Cox told the world about it in 2003.
We discovered that they were eating these flying foxes, and that was their most salient food item. We went to every family we'd interviewed. There's a toxin in your food, that these flying foxes, that the cycad seeds have this toxin. And I didn't know what they'd say, and they said, "Thank you. We didn't know what was making us sick. Now maybe we can save our children."
Cox's disease detective work unfolded like this. Cyanobacteria, which is often described as blue-green algae, contains toxins such as BMAA. In Guam, BMAA was accumulating in shallow pools of water, which was then leaching into the cycad trees. Those trees were then yielding seeds high in BMAA, which were eaten by flying fox bats. And then humans were consuming those large bats because they're considered a local delicacy.
When I first started reading about this, Paul, I thought, okay, well, this situation in Guam, that's got to be a pretty unusual situation.
Yes.
But the idea that some version of this could be happening in other parts of the world, is that likely?
Yes, and what terrified us is when we realized that cyanobacteria might be the culprit. It was like staring into the abyss because we realized you could be exposed anywhere.
What are you saying then? If people are thinking about Alzheimer's, thinking about these neurodegenerative diseases, the likelihood that cyanobacteria, something that looks like this, could be the culprit or at least part of the culprit, how likely is that?
I'd say it's a risk factor. It's one path. There's probably many risk factors for Alzheimer's. And at this point, our hypothesis is that exposure to these cyanobacteria increases your risk of certain neurodegenerative illnesses.
To figure out just how big a risk factor, Cox's team took cyanobacteria and replicated those toxic effects of the BMAA in vervet monkeys.
You had one group of animals who got placebo, basically the normal diet, another group that got the toxin, BMAA, and a third group that got the toxin and L-serine, this amino acid.
And that L-serine reduced the density of neuropathology by up to 85%, depending on the brain region. So that suddenly we thought, wow, this potentially should be considered as a possible way of treating Alzheimer's.
A simple amino acid known as L-serine.
If you also gave the L-serine
with the toxin, boom,
it seemed to be protective.
It's protective. It was these data that we took to the FDA that led into our advanced clinical trial.
How do we get L-serine? Is it something that we normally get in our diet?
Yeah, L-serine is rich in our diet. I mean,
What kinds of food?
eggs are rich. Anything involving soy tofu, edamame, sweet potatoes, turkey, pork. You know, there's a lot of sources. But what amazes me is the average American gets from all of their dietary sources about 3 grams per day of L-serine. These people in Ogimi are living to be 100 years old. They get 4 times what we get.
I spent time with the people he's talking about as part of my Chasing Life CNN original series. Here in Japan's tropical south, on the island of Okinawa, it's what's called a blue zone, which means it's home to some of the longest living people in the world.
Yeah, this one. Do you still eat a lot of these today?
Now, Dr. Paul Cox is taking that Okinawan diet high in L-serine and putting it to the test here in the United States at Houston Methodist.
Essentially, the purpose of the study is to find if the L-serine is able to help these patients slow down or even stop the progression of Alzheimer's disease.
Using these jelly beans, researchers are giving 30 grams of L-serine a day for 6 months. It's a placebo-controlled trial of 100 patients with mild cognitive impairment.
They have to remember words.
Led by neurologist Dr. Gustavo Roman, changes are measured through cognitive tests, PET scans, and blood biomarkers.
This is always a hard question, but if it were your relative, would you tell them to take L-serine?
We're confident it's safe now, but we want to make sure it's efficacious before we suggest anybody try it. We're going to know for sure in a short time if L-serine can treat mild cognitive impairment, which is a precursor to Alzheimer's. If it's a treatment, it also might be a preventative, so stay tuned.
Now, halfway through the trial, results are expected in 2025.